4:47 a.m., Gillespie County, Texas. 14 acres of dark hill country limestone, mesquite scrub, and one cluster of low cinder block buildings set back 300 feet from US 290. No lights on in the main kennel. Dogs sleeping. The parking lot empty, except for a row of government vehicles that had arrived without sirens. Then the breach team moved. 12 members of the FBI's hostage rescue team stacked on the rear wall of the eastern outbuilding. 12 more approached the second structure from the north. DEA tactical agents secured the perimeter and the residence. The property manager's truck was already boxed in by a black Suburban. The operation had been rehearsed on a full-scale plywood mock-up at Quantico for 72 hours. Every door, every corridor, every lock position had been mapped from blueprints obtained 11 days earlier. At 4:47 a.m., on April 11, 2026, they went in simultaneously. The doors came off in under 4 seconds. What agents found behind a false grooming supply storeroom, a wall of stacked metal shelving that swung open on concealed hinges, was a climate-controlled wing that had not appeared on any permitted building plan filed with Gillespie County. 5 American women were inside, ages 24, 27, 29, 31, and 34. All alert, all conscious, all transported under medical escort within the hour to University Hospital in San Antonio. The FBI's San Antonio field office confirmed only this: all 5 had been found in conditions consistent with prolonged confinement. 2 of them had been missing for 94 days. The case that ended at 4:47 a.m. did not begin with surveillance footage, or a wiretap, or a confidential informant. It began with a quarterly purchase order for veterinary sedatives, a volume discrepancy on a DEA Form 222, a compliance officer in New Braunfels who almost didn't file a report at all. To understand how a boarding kennel on a 14-acre hill country lot became the subject of a joint FBI and DEA tactical operation, how 5 women walked out of a sealed cinder block room in the dark hours of an April morning, you have to go back to the beginning of a cover story that was, by almost any measure, nearly perfect. Hill Country Pet Retreat opened in the spring of 2024, about 8 miles east of Fredericksburg, on the southbound service road off US 290. The property had previously been a small goat operation. The new owner filed for commercial kennel licensure in March of that year, passed inspection in April, and received a 4.8-star average on Google within 6 months of opening. The American Kennel Club recognized it as an AKC-approved boarding facility in August. The facility offered grooming, socialization runs, veterinary coordination, and what the website called premium climate-controlled suites for larger breeds. The owner of record, Brett Allen Calderon, 46, formerly licensed as a veterinary technician in the state of Texas. His license had lapsed in 2021, but the kennel's operational veterinary permit was held by a second individual, Dr. Raymond Eubanks, 53, a licensed Texas veterinarian based in Kerrville, about 22 miles west. Eubanks had held DEA registration for controlled substances since 2009. His registration was in good standing. Calderon had spent 9 years working in large animal veterinary practice near Seguin. He was known in the area. He sponsored the annual 4-H livestock show in Gillespie County in both 2024 and 2025. He donated to the local animal shelter and hosted a twice-yearly adoption event in the kennel's front parking lot. His online presence was meticulous. A Facebook page with regular photos of dogs in grooming chairs, a Yelp profile with 47 reviews, a website last updated in January 2026. The front office was spotless. The kennel runs were clean. The grooming bay smelled like lavender shampoo. 4 employees rotated through the property on a standard shift schedule. Payroll was documented. Taxes were filed. On the surface, Hill Country Pet Retreat was exactly what it claimed to be. One detail kept nagging at me when I went through the case file: the controlled substance order logs from the regional distributor, because buried in those quarterly invoices was the anomaly that unraveled everything, and nobody outside of DEA diversion control had seen it until it was almost too late. In late October 2025, a compliance officer at Lone Star Vet Supply in New Braunfels was reviewing quarterly order confirmations as part of a routine DEA audit preparation. Lone Star was a mid-sized distributor serving roughly 230 veterinary practices and licensed kennels across the Texas Hill Country, the San Antonio Metro Corridor, and the Rio Grande Valley. They fulfilled orders for controlled substances under DEA distribution protocols, which meant that every order for Schedule 3 and Schedule 4 drugs required documentation, a matching DEA registration number, and a volume that corresponded to the reported scope of the receiving facility's practice. The compliance officer, reviewing Hill Country Pet Retreat's third-quarter order, flagged an inconsistency. The kennel was licensed for boarding and grooming services only. It reported no surgical capacity, no in-house veterinary procedures beyond basic health checks. Its DEA registration, held under Dr. Eubanks's name, listed a single-location boarding operation. The quarterly order for ketamine, midazolam, and acepromazine had increased to a combined volume consistent with the quarterly needs of a full-service small animal surgical hospital operating at roughly 60% capacity. That was not a rounding error. That was not a supply-run buffer. A boarding kennel ordering that volume of sedatives had two explanations. One, it was running an undisclosed veterinary surgical operation in violation of its DEA registration. Two, the drugs were going somewhere else entirely. The compliance officer filed a suspicious order report on October 29, 2025. DEA Diversion Control in Austin received the report November 3rd. A senior diversion investigator pulled the full account history for Hill Country Pet Retreat's DEA registration, covering all orders since the facility's licensure in 2024. The picture was clear. Quarterly ketamine orders had risen 240% over 6 months. Midazolam purchases had tripled. Acepromazine, an animal tranquilizer with no approved human use but well-documented off-label misuse, had been ordered in volumes 3 times the facility's stated animal population could plausibly require. The report was forwarded to the DEA San Antonio Field Division on November 6th. Within 48 hours, a liaison request went to the FBI's San Antonio Field Office. The case was assigned a joint case number. A supervisory special agent in the FBI's Violent Crimes Against Persons unit was brought in the following morning. What no one knew yet was that the sedative orders were only the outermost layer. The investigation had just begun to scratch the surface. Looking back, the critical break came from a bureaucratic form that most people treat as routine. DEA Form 222 is a standard controlled substance order form. Veterinarians file them, hospitals file them, pharmacies file them. Tens of thousands move through the system every quarter without a single flag. The compliance officer at Lone Star Vet Supply could have reviewed that order and moved on. The volume was large, but not impossible to rationalize. Maybe the kennel had expanded its services. Maybe they were over-ordering for emergencies. People talk themselves out of filing SORs every day. She filed. That decision changed everything that followed. By November 15, 2025, investigators had authorized a pen register trace on the phone lines associated with Hill Country Pet Retreat, as well as Calderon's personal mobile number and the business line registered to Eubanks in Kerrville. The results of the first 2 weeks were, as one affidavit later stated, operationally unremarkable but numerically inconsistent. Call volumes were normal. Supplier contacts, client scheduling inquiries, delivery coordination. Nothing overtly incriminating. But the financial trace told a different story. The kennel had reported gross revenue of $280,000 for calendar year 2025 on its state business filing. The actual cash flowing through accounts linked to Calderon and 2 associated LLCs, one registered in New Mexico, one in Delaware, was closer to $1.4 million over the same period. A boarding kennel generating 5 times its reported revenue on 14 acres outside Fredericksburg, Texas, with a 4.8-star Google rating and 47 Yelp reviews. That number could not exist in a legitimate boarding operation. The FBI's financial crimes analyst on the case cross-referenced the LLC accounts with federal database records over 3 days in late November. The New Mexico entity, registered under a name that did not correspond to any individual with a Texas driver's license or federal tax filing, had received wire transfers from 6 separate origin points across 3 states: Arizona, Nevada, and Georgia. The transfers were sized to stay under $10,000 individually. Each arrived within a 2-day window every 6 to 8 weeks. Structuring, deliberate and systematic. The Delaware LLC held a commercial lease on a self-storage facility in San Marcos, approximately 41 miles northeast of the Kennel. Investigators requested a subpoena for access records. The storage unit had been accessed 11 times in the preceding 4 months, always between 10 p.m. and 2 a.m., always by a single keycard registered to a name that did not appear anywhere else in the investigation's records. 3 threads were running simultaneously: the sedative volume anomaly, the cash flow discrepancy, and a storage unit accessed exclusively at night. None of them was conclusive on its own. Then the missing persons cross-match came back. The Travis County Sheriff's Office had entered 3 missing person reports into the National Crime Information Center between January 5th and February 17th, 2026. 3 women reported missing from the Austin metro area, the San Antonio city limits, and a residential address in Killeen, respectively. Ages 27, 29, and 31. No shared workplace, no shared social network, no apparent connection to one another. An FBI analyst running a geographic correlation between the missing persons reports and the LLC accounts noticed that all 3 women had last been seen within a 40-mile radius of the Kennel. The 2 most recent disappearances, from San Antonio and Killeen, had occurred within 8 days of each other in the 2nd week of February. The analyst flagged the correlation. The supervisory special agent reviewed it the same afternoon. This was no longer a DEA diversion case. The FBI's Violent Crimes Against Persons Squad took primary jurisdiction. A Title III wiretap application was filed in the Western District of Texas on February 22nd. Approved February 25th. The wiretap produced minimal direct communications within the first 10 days. Calderon used his personal mobile for kennel business and family calls. Eubanks called the kennel line twice per week to coordinate scheduled veterinary visits. The 2 men did not discuss anything operationally sensitive on monitored lines, but what came through on a prepaid number associated with one of the named associates, a man referred to in court documents only as Subject 2, was different. Subject 2 made 4 calls over the first 3 weeks of the tap, 3 to numbers that traced to prepaid handsets in Mexico, 1 to a landline in Laredo, Texas, registered to a freight forwarding company. The Laredo connection would not be fully developed until after the raid. At the time, investigators marked it and moved on. The rescue timeline had already compressed. On March 4, 2026, a DEA aviation asset operating out of San Antonio conducted a thermal infrared drone overflight of the Hill Country Pet Retreat property at dusk. The flight was logged as a routine agricultural survey, consistent with similar overflights conducted across Gillespie County. The thermal signature of the eastern outbuilding did not match its permitted size. The structure's footprint, as measured from the infrared return, was approximately 40% larger than the square footage documented in the county's permitted building records. The heat differential along the building's rear wall indicated a climate-controlled interior space, running at a temperature inconsistent with unoccupied storage that extended beyond the structure's recorded boundary. The drone operator flagged the anomaly in his technical log. The FBI analyst received the report the following morning. The case agent pulled the Gillespie County building permits filed for the Eastern Outbuilding, filed in October 2024, signed by a licensed Texas contractor whose company address was a residential property in Uvalde. The inspector's signature was legitimate. The inspection had been conducted, but the square footage on the permit was 41% smaller than the actual structure's thermal profile. Someone had built a room that did not officially exist. Climate-controlled, sealed, wired into the kennel's existing HVAC system in a way that would not show up on a standard utility audit. The rescue plan was on the special agent in charge's desk before dawn on March 6th. What struck us about this moment was how the system functioned as designed, not through any single act of heroism, but through routine procedural steps, each individually unremarkable. An SOR, a financial cross-match, a geographic correlation, a thermal overflight, federal investigation executing as intended. And still, at that point, 5 women had already been inside that building for weeks. The decision to move immediately versus extending surveillance carried significant risk in either direction. Extending surveillance risked 3 outcomes. First, the women inside the sealed wing might be relocated before an arrest could be made. And if that happened, they might not be found again. Second, a premature leak from any of the 12 people now read into the operation could trigger a rapid evacuation of the property. Third, the Laredo freight connection suggested the possibility of an extraction mechanism that could be activated with short notice. Moving immediately risked compromising a broader network investigation. The Laredo number, the 3 Mexican prepaid numbers, and the New Mexico LLC origin accounts all suggested that Hill Country Pet Retreat was not a standalone operation. A rapid takedown of Calderon and the known associates would allow nodes further up the chain to go dark before they could be identified. The SAC in San Antonio convened a joint command meeting on March 7th with representatives from DEA's San Antonio Field Division, the FBI's Violent Crimes Against Persons Unit, the FBI's Financial Crimes Desk, and a DEA Diversion Control Liaison. The decision was recorded in the operational command log as follows: immediate rescue priority, with network preservation as secondary objective. If the sealed room contained living victims, their welfare superseded the intelligence value of continuing surveillance. There was one operational problem. The building's internal layout was unknown. The thermal footprint confirmed the existence of the sealed space and its approximate dimensions. It did not show how it was accessed, how many interior rooms existed, or whether the access point from the main storeroom was visible or concealed. The HRT entry team needed a floor plan. On March 12th, a court-authorized technical entry was conducted at 3:40 a.m. while the property was unoccupied. A 2-person FBI technical operations team accessed the main kennel building through the grooming bay's rear service door, which had been rendered unlockable through a supply delivery intercept 2 days prior. They placed 3 miniaturized acoustic sensors inside the eastern storeroom's walls and retrieved floor material samples for forensic baseline. The acoustic sensors returned their first useful data on March 15th. The sealed wing had at minimum 2 interior spaces. One produced ambient mechanical noise, consistent with HVAC circulation. The second produced intermittent human movement, footsteps, the occasional sound of a door, and on March 17th, a sound the FBI's Technical Review Unit classified as a human voice, at frequencies consistent with a female speaker. At that point, the decision was no longer debatable. The rescue plan was finalized on March 22nd. A full-scale plywood mock-up of the kennel's eastern outbuilding was constructed at the FBI's training facility in Quantico, Virginia, based on the thermal footprint, the acoustic sensor data, and additional measurements taken during the technical entry. The HRT team assigned to the operation conducted 8 full rehearsals over 6 days. There is a line in the operational planning document from that period that stays with me. Reading through the case file, it reads, Entry must achieve complete immediate control of the interior space before any occupant of the sealed wing can be accessed by the subjects. Duration from breach to interior access. Target not to exceed 90 seconds. 90 seconds. That was the margin. Put yourself in the team leader's position for a moment. It's 3 a.m. at a practice mock-up in Virginia. You're running this for the 8th time. You know that somewhere in Texas, in a room that doesn't exist on paper, there are people who have been there for months. And your job is to design an entry that takes 90 seconds from breach to that door. They got it to 73 seconds by the final rehearsal. The 45-day gap between the SAC receiving the rescue plan in early March and the actual breach on April 11th shouldn't be dismissed as a measured professional decision. It was 45 days during which 5 women were still in that room. The network intelligence objective, the Laredo connection, the upstream financial links, matters to law enforcement. But it's worth saying plainly that the intelligence value of those additional weeks, measured against what was found inside, doesn't represent an obvious trade-off. Some decisions in federal law enforcement are defensible procedurally and still deserve scrutiny. This one does. On April 2, 2026, a federal grand jury in the Western District of Texas returned sealed indictments against Calderon, Eubanks, and 2 additional named individuals. The 4th individual, identified in court documents as a non-U.S. national, was identified through the Laredo freight connection and had not been located as of the date of the indictment. The indictments remained sealed pending the rescue operation. On the evening of April 10th, the full operational element assembled at a staging area in a private industrial lot 12 miles east of the property. Total personnel, 41 agents and tactical officers, 12 FBI HRT operators, 14 DEA tactical agents, 8 FBI support personnel covering communications, medical, and evidence collection, 4 FBI agents for resident and associate detention, 3 DEA diversion specialists for controlled substance evidence processing, 2 FBI victim specialists, and 2 medical technicians from the San Antonio EMS system were staged 2 miles from the property in a medical transport vehicle, running dark. University Hospital in San Antonio had been notified through a protocol contact that they should expect multiple patients requiring evaluation for prolonged confinement. No further detail was provided to the hospital in advance. At 2:47 a.m. on April 11th, the convoy moved out. The property was approached from 2 directions simultaneously. A DEA element came up the main access road from US 290. The HRT element approached across an adjacent property on foot from the northeast, crossing a low limestone ridge in the dark, covering approximately 1,200 feet of rough terrain. At 4:31 a.m., perimeter was established. All exits from the main residence, the kennel office, the vehicle parking area, and both outbuildings were covered. Calderon was inside the main residence. 3 associates were on the property, 2 in the kennel staff quarters attached to the main building, 1 in a vehicle in the parking area. Eubanks was not on site. His residential address in Kerrville was being covered simultaneously by a 4-person FBI arrest team. At 4:44 a.m., the arrest elements moved on the residence and the staff quarters. Both were secured within 2 minutes and 40 seconds. At 4:47 a.m., the breach teams went in. The eastern outbuilding's main door came off in under 4 seconds. The interior of the building was a standard layout kenneling and storage space. Metal shelving units, supply containers, grooming equipment. In the rear left corner, a shelving unit 12 feet wide and 7 feet tall was mounted to a steel track system embedded in the concrete floor. It swung open on a pneumatic hinge mechanism, activated by a pressure release behind a false electrical panel on the adjacent wall. Behind it, a corridor, approximately 6 feet wide and 30 feet long, with 2 doors on the left side and 1 door at the far end. Climate control running. Interior temperature, 71 degrees Fahrenheit. HRT was through the opening in 11 seconds. The first door on the left opened to a utility and mechanical space. The second door was locked from the outside with a commercial-grade deadbolt. The third door, at the corridor's end, was also locked. Both locks were defeated in under 60 seconds. The women inside were found in two groups, 3 in the larger room at the corridor's end, 2 in the room behind the second door. All 5 were ambulatory. All 5 were responsive. Medical assessment at the scene by the 2 FBI victim specialists and the EMTs, who were called in from the staging vehicle immediately upon breach confirmation, took 22 minutes. At 5:31 a.m., all 5 women were loaded into the medical transport vehicle under federal escort. The FBI's public statement, released at 8:15 a.m. that morning, confirmed only that 5 adult women had been recovered from the property and transported for medical evaluation. It confirmed that they were in stable condition and receiving treatment consistent with prolonged confinement. It did not describe the nature of their confinement or the conditions found inside the sealed wing. It named Calderon and 3 associates as taken into federal custody. It noted that 1 individual connected to the investigation remained at large. The ATF's evidence processing team, working under DEA Diversion Authority on the Controlled Substance Inventory, spent 14 hours on the property on April 11th and 12th. What they cataloged tells a precise story about how the operation had functioned. 4 handguns, 2 AR pattern rifles with standard capacity magazines and approximately 800 rounds of associated ammunition, $416,000 in cash, bundled in consistent denominations and packed in a fireproof lockbox inside the residence. A vault, embedded in the concrete floor of the western outbuilding, containing 47 forged identification documents, driver's licenses, passports, and social security cards representing 17 separate identities, none of which matched any person with a known legitimate record. A second set of documents related to the 2 LLCs and the controlled substance inventory. The sealed storage within the corridor's mechanical room contained quantities of ketamine, midazolam, and acepromazine that, cross-referenced against the Lone Star Vet Supply order logs, indicated that approximately 40% of what had been ordered under Eubanks's DEA registration over the preceding 8 months had not been used at the kennel's reported operational level. The gap between documented veterinary use and ordered volume represented a significant quantity unaccounted for at the time of the search. DEA diversion investigators would spend the following 6 weeks attempting to account for the missing portion. The answer, developed through forensic accounting and additional subpoenas, pointed toward the Laredo connection, the freight forwarding company whose landline had appeared on Subject 2's wiretapped prepaid phone. The freight company was a licensed commercial operation handling cross-border pharmaceutical logistics. DEA agents executed a separate search warrant at the Laredo facility on April 17th. They found records of 18 shipments over a 14-month period, originating from a pharmaceutical warehouse address in Nuevo Leon, Mexico, cleared through customs, under documentation showing the contents as veterinary supplies destined for licensed U.S. veterinary practices. The receiving DEA registration numbers on the customs documentation were real, but they did not belong to the facilities the shipments claimed to represent. The Laredo company's principals maintained they had processed the shipments in good faith. Their liability was the subject of a separate federal inquiry as of late April 2026. The 4th individual named in the sealed indictment, the non-U.S. national connected through the freight chain, had not been apprehended as of the date the grand jury unsealed the indictments on April 14th. An Interpol red notice was issued. That individual's location, as of June 2026, remained unknown. Dr. Raymond Eubanks was arrested at his Kerrville residence at 4:51 a.m. on April 11th, approximately 4 minutes after the property breach. His initial appearance in the Western District of Texas was April 14th. He was charged with conspiracy to commit violations of the Controlled Substances Act, aiding and abetting unlawful detention, and obstruction of justice. His attorney entered a not guilty plea. Eubanks was remanded without bail, the prosecution having argued successfully that his professional DEA registration, still active at the time of his arrest, represented an ongoing risk of evidence manipulation. The prosecutor's argument in the detention hearing was brief. Eubanks had provided the DEA registration number that made the sedative orders possible. Without that registration, the chemical supply chain did not function. He was the mechanism. Most people assume that operations like this require a corrupt official, a complicit law enforcement figure, or a major cartel connection to function. The evidence here tells a different story. Eubanks was a licensed professional operating in routine practice, whose registration was exploited through a straightforward conspiracy. The mechanism wasn't sophisticated. It was paperwork. And that is, in some ways, more disturbing than a complicated scheme would be, because it means the access point was ordinary. The 3 women reported missing from Austin, San Antonio, and Killeen were reunited with their families within the week following their rescue. 2 additional women recovered from the property, whose missing person reports had not yet been filed in Texas. Both had been reported missing by families in other states, were connected with those families through the FBI's Victim Services Coordinators by April 19th. All 5 women received ongoing support through the Bureau's Victim Witness Assistance Program. The extent to which the women's confinement was part of a broader operation, extending beyond the Hill Country property, remained under active federal investigation. The Laredo freight records, the 3 Mexican prepaid numbers that had appeared on the wiretap, and 2 of the 17 forged identity sets found in the vault pointed toward connections that investigators had not fully mapped by the end of April 26. The network, in other words, was likely larger than what was recovered on 14 acres east of Fredericksburg. One detail that stuck with me in this case: of the 47 forged identity documents found in the vault, only 17 identities were traceable through federal records to individuals with any known connection to the operation. The remaining 30 had no apparent relationship to anyone identified in the investigation. Federal agents described them, in internal documentation reviewed for this account, as prepared documents of unknown intended purpose. 47 forged identities, 30 with no connection to anyone charged. That vault tells a story the indictment doesn't fully answer. Who those identities were being prepared for and why is a thread the investigation had not closed as of June 2026. Brett Calderon entered a not guilty plea at his initial appearance on April 14th in San Antonio Federal Court. His attorney declined comment to reporters outside the courthouse. Subject 2, named in the indictment as Marcos Delgado Reyes, 41, a dual U.S.-Mexican national, was taken into custody at the scene and appeared for arraignment 3 days later. He, too, entered a not guilty plea. Trial dates for Calderon, Delgado Reyes, and Eubanks had not been set as of late June 2026. The complexity of the financial evidence, the ongoing nature of the upstream investigation, and the pending international extradition proceedings for the 4th named defendant made a trial timeline difficult to estimate. Prosecutors described the case as proceeding toward indictment consolidation. The website for Hill Country Pet Retreat went offline on April 12th. The 4.8-star Google profile remains indexed. The 47 Yelp reviews are still visible, describing clean facilities, friendly staff, and dogs who came home happy. The compliance officer at Lone Star Vet Supply in New Braunfels filed her suspicious order report on October 29, 2025. By federal whistleblower protocol, her identity has not been made public. She has not been named in any court filing. The case that began with her decision will almost certainly proceed to trial without her name appearing in a headline. The 4th defendant is still out there. The freight records from Laredo account for 18 documented shipments. Investigators do not know how many others moved through channels that didn't leave paper trails. And somewhere in the federal system, 30 forged identities sit in an evidence vault, prepared, complete, and waiting to be explained. The sealed room on the Hill Country property no longer exists in any operational sense. The building has been posted with federal evidence notices. The HVAC system that kept it at 71 degrees has been shut down. The demand that required a room like that to exist has not been shut down. Will operations like this surface again in the next 5 years? Comment yes or no. We read